Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Senator Steinberg and myself would like to give our reaction to the governor's State of the State address this morning. And I would just like to begin by saying that I was pleased with the governor's tone. I was appreciative of the fact that he is choosing to start his final year in office, and it's my final year as well, with a tone that I think sent a signal of cooperation between our both branches of government, and his acknowledgement of what we have been able to accomplish, especially in this last year and a half with a record deficit, our historic water deal, acknowledging education reform, which I know will be passing the Senate later on this afternoon. I was happy to see him pledge not to cut education or higher education, K through 12 or higher education. In fact, it would have been a bit of a contradiction to do that to begin this year, given that we will be submitting our application for Race to the Top next week, and one of the fundamental requirements of that application is that we have a commitment to education and supporting education funding. He talked about job training and putting $500 million into job training. I think that that's all well and good. One thing I would say, though, is that I think our first order of business needs to be restoring funding to job training funds that we cut last year, and so that those 40,000 mothers of whom had their job training cut last year actually have that funding restored. Also, I think we need to acknowledge that in our state, we have tens of thousands of highly skilled, highly trained workers that need to go back to work in their field. And so job training is fine, but, I appreciate his commitment to jobs, but I do think there's other things that we can do. I personally like the home buyer tax credit. I think that was a very successful program. I would like to see that expanded, but I don't think that this year is the year to expand tax credits, frankly. I do want to look forward to moving a piece of legislation that I'm doing in conjunction with my mayor, Antonio Villaraigosa, that will help more families avoid foreclosure. That helps stabilize our housing market, and I believe that that's a win for the economy and for the budget. I think, frankly, that we need to look back at some of the tax breaks that we gave last year and think about rolling those back versus coming up with additional tax breaks, such as the sales tax break that he mentioned for green technology. I was delighted to hear him talk about the imbalance in spending between prisons and education. However, I do not believe at all that privatizing prisons is the way to do that. I think we need to look at why California incarcerates more people than any other state. We need to look at ways to reduce recidivism, and we certainly need to look at sentencing reform. I think that's the way we reduce spending in corrections. And I think if there was any one area of his speech that I was just frankly disappointed in, and that was his call for our congressional delegation to vote against health care reform. I think that's a premature call. I am so excited that on a national level we are on the verge of a historic piece of legislation that is going to expand health care to millions of people, is going to do away with pre-existing conditions being a reason to not provide insurance, the permanent cap on insurance. So I think that we're on the verge of something tremendous, and everyone in this room knows that right now in Congress, in both houses of Congress, they're talking about reconciling the two bills. So I was disappointed in that, and in fact I think that that was premature. He did make his pitch for additional federal funding, and so I'm glad that he will be joining Senator Steinberg and myself, because we have certainly been fighting that good fight to make sure that California brings more than 76 cents back a year. And so I'm going to look forward to working with him on that. I'm glad that he made a pledge around education. I do have a few pledges of my own. I want to pledge that we're not going to hurt cities and counties anymore, that we will invest in transportation. And also, I want to pledge that we are not going to further shred the safety net. It's great to say we're going to have a firewall around education, but we cannot cut the safety net for the most vulnerable Californians anymore. But in short, I think if he continues with this tone, it's going to be a promising start to the governor's last year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I would say in terms of our trip back to Washington, D.C., that I know I speak on your behalf when I say we'd be happy to offer the governor a seat on our plane.
As soon as we get
to
one.
head back there, right? Exactly, exactly. I echo many of, in fact, all of your statements. Just a few additional comments. We're on the verge of an economic recovery in California, and our most important task this year is to hasten that recovery. And I appreciate the governor's commitment to cut no more to education, higher education. And like the speaker, I also thought his tone was excellent. The governor loves California, and his dedication to our state shows and shines through. But I had some significant concerns with a couple of the preliminary proposals. Though he didn't say it in detail, we understand that the governor's jobs package, and jobs, jobs, jobs ought to be the mantra. His job package calls for the rollback of environmental and consumer protection laws. This is an unnecessary deflection from the opportunity that is right in front of him. Want to create jobs in California? The administration needs to start by looking in its own backyard. We have $3 billion of already approved bond funds for projects that have the greatest potential to create jobs for Californians. We have nearly $20 billion of federal stimulus money collecting dust in the bureaucracy that needs to get out to the street. Just yesterday, Laura Chick, the auditor, reported that there is a 60-day and growing backlog in the Office of Historical Preservation to get money out the door to create high-wage jobs. So rather than engage in another ideological battle with the legislature around rollback of environmental and consumer protection laws, let's go back to the basics here. And let's stimulate the economy by taking the money that we have, getting it out faster, having the state do its job, and put people back to work. And I'm sure with the Assembly, we're going to have our Senate budget committees, whether it's weekly or however amount is necessary, to call the administration before our committees to ask them every week, where is this money? Is it getting out the door? And if not, why not? The second area of concern that I had relates to the governor's proposed constitutional amendment around higher education and corrections. I actually like the idea. I want to be very clear. I think it is aspirational. But it would have been a much more effective call to action by the governor 6 years ago. Because when you look at the history of the budget over the past 6 years, prison spending has increased 32%. And higher education spending has decreased 9%. Currently, we spend more on prisons than we do on higher education. While it is important to hold the line, and again, we appreciate the governor's call to not cut any further to higher education and K-12 education, it's not just a matter of hanging on, it's a matter of restoration. It's a matter of making up for much that has been lost because there are too many kids today that aren't getting the education they need and deserve. There are too many families that can't afford to send their child to our public university system. On the issue of credits, expanding the housing buyer tax credit, I think it's a great program. I agree with the speaker. His idea about tax cut or sales tax break to stimulate green businesses, all fine ideas. But if we do them, they ought to be replaced dollar for dollar with reducing the existing tax breaks that have not been proven to actually stimulate the economy or result in jobs. And so, just like last year, we look forward to working with the governor. This system only, works, and we only do right by the people of California when we're able to find the common ground. But we are also going to fight in the right way for people, for families, and for beginning to set a direction in California that restores much of what has been lost. It's hard to do it in the environment that we are living in now with the deficit. And it may be more than a year, but we need to begin setting the stage now to do no more harm and to begin thinking about how we reinvest in California. Happy to answer your questions.
Senator, about the constitutional amendment, I want to make sure I'm clear. For years, the legislature has complained about, quote, ballot box budgeting, end quote. This sounds exactly like ballot box budgeting.
It does.
And it sounds like you're setting up a stage for more conflict over limited dollars. How can you justify doing this?
We're not doing anything. I don't even say we endorsed it. I'm just saying I think it's aspirational. I think it's aspirational. And it's the right goal. Whether or not it should be a constitutional amendment or not, I have some doubts for the very reasons that you said. But my main point is that it would have been a much more effective and timely message 6 years ago. Because now it's not enough to couple that aspirational idea with saying, well, you know, we're going to cut more in different areas or we're merely going to hold the line. We need an investment strategy in California over time that's going to restore much of what's been lost.
Could you comment, Madam Speaker? Could you comment on that, please?
Sure. I mean, I would certainly agree with him. My reaction to it was the same in terms of ballot box budgeting, but I do think that we need to see what his entire proposal is, and I imagine that we'll see that on Friday. You know, I mentioned before, I was excited the fact that he compared education to prisons. That's something that you often hear the Democrats do.
That's good.
So, you know, I appreciated that. I just think how he sees getting there is different.
Could either of you comment on the notion, he talked about the Tax Reform Commission and its
Yes,
recommendations.
yes. I'd
and
like
he
to
said
comment on
they're
that.
missing, where are they?
I would like to, I thought that was a little funny, a
Not only
little
comment,
humor.
but also, what is the status of them?
Yeah,
Are they dead on arrival?
I will tell you.
Okay.
They didn't actually go poof in the dome. What we did is that we did have hearings. We had hearings in the fall. Maybe he's not aware that we had hearings about the proposals. And you remember that I stood up here with the governor, very supportive of having that tax commission. I was very excited about it, and I have to compliment the people that put in a tremendous amount of volunteer hours. Having said that, the main proposal that they're talking about, the business net receipt tax, is a very controversial proposal, and you probably know that tax scholars across the country essentially denounce that, and especially when you're talking about the world's 8th largest economy, or whatever number we are right now, experimenting with a program, a tax structure that really hasn't been tested. Michigan is trying it out. It's a very mixed bag. I think that they're considering it in Texas, and so I can't imagine that we would adopt that. You know, just my own personal opinion about the tax commission, I guess I had hoped that they would have come back with the idea of lowering sales tax and broadening it. They attempted to do that. They weren't able to get there. So you will see us review the commission report further, but I do not believe that you would see that proposal being voted on. And frankly, I don't believe that you would get Republican or Democratic support for that proposal.
I just want to add that you will see specific proposals for tax reform out of the Democrats this year. And here's really the rub. The call for flattening the tax system to some degree to reduce the peaks and the valleys is generally sound. But we have to be sensitive to two issues. Number one, do those who can least afford it end up paying more?
Right.
And maybe more important than that, does changing that tax system lead to the opportunity to restore over time our investments for public education, higher education, and health care and other public services in California? In other words, what is the bargain here? What's the give to get? We know the current system is not working well for California. You'll see proposals from us this year.
Do you think the education proposal the governor has, saying not cutting higher ed, not cutting K-12, is that realistic? It's such a huge part of the budget. We've got a $20 billion hole. I mean, what gets cut then instead, and how deep?
Well, I think that's going to be interesting to see on Friday. You know, in a way, as I mentioned, you have to say that right now when you're going to send an application into the federal government next week for Race to the Top. But I'm sure I can speak for my colleague here that we don't support the notion that we're going to have a firewall on education and we're going to eliminate everything else. And of course, what I'm concerned about is health and human services and the safety net, because the safety net programs are on life support as it is. And I don't, I would never support the elimination. And so if that would be the trade-off, I would not support that.
And look, we recognize, the state of the economy here, and we always have to be very careful. But let's remember some of the elements that were left on the budget table last year. In California, if you're a working person, your employer takes a percentage of your income up front as withholding for taxes. It's the way it is. Same does not apply to businesses, independent contractors. If we were to impose 3% withholding, the same as we do for workers, $1.9 billion first year in the California Treasury, $300 million ongoing after that. Now, people might criticize that. Okay, everything is a matter of comparison. The choice of cutting another $1.9 billion out of the safety net or out of economic opportunity for people, or imposing the same rules on contractors that we apply to working people, I choose the latter. And, that may be where we have a real vigorous budget debate here in California, because there are some other things that we can do short of continuing to shred, needed investments in California.
One area of the safety net that is going to be top on my agenda is restoring the $80 million that was cut from foster care. I have no doubt that children's lives have been compromised, if not even lost, because of that cut, because that cut resulted in hundreds of social workers being laid off. And when social workers are laid off, they can't intervene in families and kids that are at risk. And so I'm going to be looking for that. If he found $500 million for job training, and I definitely support the concept, I'm looking for $80 million for foster care.
Can I make one other point? The speaker talked about the privatization issue around corrections, and I echo her comments. I don't think that's the way to go. It certainly ought not to be the main point of attention and debate. What he didn't discuss, but what needs to be talked about now, is the administration settling that overcrowding lawsuit in the federal court in California. Because we know the essence of the corrections problem is that over decades we have increased criminal penalties, and we failed to pay for incarcerating the tens of thousands of additional people that we now incarcerate. And the courts have said enough is enough, do something about it. The legislature made a good stride with the governor, to his credit, last year. But now he needs to finish it by settling that lawsuit. Settling the lawsuit would result in a savings of between $1 and $2 billion, depending upon the nature of the actual settlement. And if you look at the current year budget deficit, $1.4 billion of it is the shortfall in corrections. Settle the lawsuit.
On the job training, do you support the premise of where he's saying he can take the money from?
I want to look at it further,
look at
but
it. I don't know.
It's possible. But like I said, my first order will be restoring the job training funding.
Could you
of last year.
elaborate on that point you made on that? And you
Sure.
mentioned a program.
Sure, it was
existing
it was in CalWorks, and what happened is that it was eliminated last year, and that's job training for roughly 40,000, essentially women, and at the lowest income, to get them off of CalWorks, because you know that there is a time limit for public assistance. So we eliminated that program last year, and I would like to see that
What's the dollar
restored.
value there, you know?
Not off the top of my head. I know it wasn't $500 million, though.
Senator, there's no doubt going to be another major push by the Republicans. You referred to it a little bit earlier about rolling back environmental laws, maybe even AB 32. And yet, in the stadium debate, you did exactly that. How much of a commitment are you making to protect the environment, to protect AB 32 this year?
We're not going to go down that road.
Right. We're not gonna go down there.
We are not going to go down that road. We can debate the stadium issue. That was the exception to the rule because of the timing issues involved in that potential economic opportunity. But if we spend our time having a divisive and ideological debate about California's landmark environmental laws, as opposed to taking the billions of dollars that are sitting in our coffers and getting them out the door faster, we are missing the opportunity. I want to read to you from Laura Chick's report here because it's stark and revealing to me. Again, she points out a 2-month backlog. The Office of Historical Preservation to put a stamp down on a sheet of paper and to allow that money to begin flowing. And what she says is many projects are for weatherization, which may be extremely small in scope, like installing a heating and air conditioning unit. The sheer quantity of these projects has been problematic for the Office of Historic Preservation. These are jobs.
Right.
And it's the first job of government to take the resources that you have and to put them to work for working people. And that's where the administration's focus needs to be.
Let me speak about the stadium project, given that it was in my city and I was a supporter of that. One of the controversies of that project and the pushback in my caucus, there were a lot of people in my caucus that supported it, but there were people in my caucus that were worried about it because they felt that it was sending a signal then that we would go further down that road. And let me just say in no uncertain terms that I did not view it that way then. I viewed it as an absolute exception because of very particular circumstances in that project, but in no way were we going to allow that to send the signal that we were willing to roll back environmental laws. And in fact, the way it is proposed, at least in his speech, I have to say, of course, I haven't read the details, but the way it's proposed in his speech is that we would give authority and not even know what the projects are, but give authority for 20 projects. And that makes no sense at all. It's an excuse to avoid environmental laws. The same thing with the quote-unquote frivolous lawsuits. To me, that's a part of ideology that, is being pushed perhaps in the governor's last year. Maybe it's part of his legacy, but I can't imagine either one of those areas moving forward.
When are you going to
Strike
Washington?
either one of you as ironic that the governor's talking about investing all this money and creating new jobs and training at the same time talking about extending furloughs for state workers?
Well, yes, I do think that that's, a little ironic, but like I said, it's also ironic that we cut job training funding last year. So, I'm glad that there's the focus on jobs. I support that.
The furlough, we don't know, for example, whether the furloughs are the sole cause or the major cause of the failure to get out billions of dollars of job creation money. But it is certainly an area that we are going to aggressively look at because this meat cleaver approach across the board, 3 days of furlough for most all state employees, is not only harming a lot of families, but it's also counterproductive in terms of restoring the strength of our economy. Wait to see what he has to say in the budget, whether he has any specific proposals to reduce the furlough days. I sure hope so.